Hey again, and welcome back to Misty Mountain Reads. I'm still Anna. I'm still obsessed with books and coffee. And today I want to take you on a blind date, or several blind dates, with some of my favorite books. Spilled. Bookstores will occasionally have a section called Blind Date with a Book. And what they've done is they've wrapped the book in paper so that you can't see the cover, and then written out a very brief description of the book, not like what you would see on the back, but more like one word, 2-word phrases, sometimes a quote from the book. They'll give you the themes, the genre, sometimes the page number. It's a very, very vague overview of what you're going to find in the book. But what this does is it keeps you from making a judgment before you buy the book based off of the cover. Have I bought a book simply because of the cover? Yes, definitely, 100%. But going on a blind date with a book can be a great way to try something new and get you out of your comfort zone and maybe find something that you wouldn't necessarily have picked because of the appearance of the book, but that you actually love. And if you are in a reading slump, this is a great way to try to get out of it. And I do have more recommendations for reading slumps in my most recent video. So today I'm going to act kind of like those bookstores and take you on a blind date with 5 of some of my favorites. I'm not going to give you the name of the book and I'm not going to give you the author, but if you follow the link in the description for each of these books, I'll label it book 1, book 2, book 3, etc. with the link for each of them. Then you'll be able to purchase the book, and you'll also be seeing the title and the author when you do so. If you were going to buy this at a bookstore, you wouldn't actually see what it was until you'd purchased it because it looks like this, wrapped in paper. But I can't really do that, so we're just going to make it work and see how it goes. Alright, so this is book 1. I can't show you the cover. I'm acting like I can show you the cover. I can't do that. For this one, I have low fantasy with a historical setting. So if you don't know what low fantasy is, there's low fantasy and high fantasy. Low fantasy is set in the real... Why is it so hard to say real world? Real world. Low fantasy is set in the real world with obvious magical fantasy elements. Harry Potter is a good example of that. Percy Jackson, those are just 2 that came to mind. High fantasy is set in a completely different world with a lot more world building that has to go along with that. This is set in the real world but in the past, and it's not specific time setting. Like I can't tell you, oh, this is the 1500s or the 1700s. But it is historical. This is a loose retelling of multiple fairy tales that have been combined to create one very different story. Transylvania with fairies is another thing that I wrote down. Secrets, secrets, and more secrets. Romance is definitely part of this story. However, the much larger story here is about familial love, and it revolves around sisters and family and things like that. Now, there is romance to it. It's not spicy romance, if that makes a difference to you. And lastly, I have that this is a standalone. However, there is a second book that follows the story of a side character in this book. On to book 2. This one's a little bit chunkier. I wrote down low fantasy with a future setting to this. Now, I'm thinking about that now. I'm like, I don't know if it's necessarily low fantasy. It's getting close to high fantasy. It's kind of in the middle. If there was a middle genre, which there might be that I'm not aware of, it would fit in between. 2 introverts who must get married. I got vibes of Howl's Moving Castle, Jane Eyre, and Pride and Prejudice from this book. Do with that as you will. There's illusions. There's the trust no one trope, and literally no one. There's elements of mythology, and it's not... I'm just gonna leave it at that. Elements of mythology. And lastly, cliffhangers. Once you buy this book, you're gonna want to buy the second one before you finish it, because it just kind of ends and you're left going, what? And then the second one picks up right where this one leaves off. So, word the wise, you need the second one. Book 3. This one is realistic fiction, which I don't read a ton of, I'll be honest. However, this is one of my favorites. I called this Pixar's Up for grown-ups. It's got your classic curmudgeon old man and found family trope. I also wrote heartwarming, heartfelt, and heartbreaking. It takes a look at grief and what it means to be loved and to love someone. You'll definitely laugh until you cry and cry until you laugh when you read this book. I also wrote down real characters who become dear friends. They felt remarkably real. This is also a standalone, but the author has quite a few other books published. They are not tied into this one, but if you like this author, he does have other works. Book 4. Alright, this one is hardback, so it looks a little bit bigger, but it's not actually that much longer. I think it's actually quite shorter than the others that I've already recommended. This one is comedic fantasy. 100% do not take this book seriously. It is meant to be very funny, and there is no real like, oh, I can make life connections here, I can think deeply about this plot line. No, that's not happening. It's puns, it's humor, it's 100% Monty Python vibes. That's what I wrote down. There's also a goat who is the goat, as in the greatest of all time, and I 100% stand by that statement. This book is really just Dungeons and Dragons chaotic campaign turned into a book. It is a standalone, but there are 2 other books set in the same world, so sort of a series. I don't know what to call that. Book 5. So this one is medium-sized. And this is a dystopian novel that is the most realistic and believable dystopian that I have ever read. Now, I have not read a ton of dystopian, so I don't have a whole lot of experience in that genre. However, this is by far the best that I've read. It's a collection of short stories that were originally written. It started with a novella that was published, and then the author grew upon that world and combined those short stories into one book, which is this, and it reads as one. If no one had told me that it was short stories, I would have thought that it was just a little bit of a rambling plot that eventually connects, and it does. All those stories eventually connect, and it feels like a whole piece. So don't let that deter you, but I'm glad that I knew that going in, because it made it feel a little less rambly. Stepping outside is essentially death. But a lot of people want to go outside. What do they know? I wrote slow descent into suspense and mystery. And that descent is literal sometimes. If you're claustrophobic, this book is not for you. It definitely has a weightiness to it, and I don't mean that in just a figurative sense. I genuinely felt claustrophobic reading this book, and heavy, and like I was being closed in, and it was intense, but I loved it, and I am claustrophobic, so maybe it is for you. I don't want to make that judgment call. That's what we're doing here. We're not making judgment calls. This is the first in a series. There is 2 other books, and then I've not actually read all of these, but there's a ton of fan fiction that is set in the same world that I have not read, but I've heard that it's really good. Wow, I like barely drank my coffee today. That went by a lot faster than I thought it would. So there you go. There's 5 recommendations that you don't even know what they are, and I hope that you try them. I know this is a little bit of a weird idea for a video, but I wanted to give it a try because I found some really great books when I did blind dates with a book in a bookstore, and none of the bookstores around me are currently open. So I thought I would try it on my own, and we'll see how it goes. And remember that I've linked all of those below so that you can find them yourself. And if you do try them, I suggest not reading the description before you buy it or the reviews, because that kind of defeats the purpose, but do what you want. And thank you for joining along. I really like doing these, and I hope that you enjoy watching them. So, okay, see you later.